You know those days that start off ordinary, like any other, but then everything goes horribly wrong? Well, this is one of those stories. I'm about to tell you about the time my seemingly perfect neighborhood turned into a nightmare. And it all started with my dog, Max, the golden retriever I adored more than anything. I never thought my neighbor, Karen, would ever be the cause of so much chaos. To be honest, she seemed like the typical busybody neighbor, always overstepping her boundaries, always poking her nose into things that didn't concern her. But I never expected her to cross a line like this. Never expected her to target Max. Yet, that's exactly what happened. And the best part, I used her own poison to get her arrested. How? Well, let me walk you through it. It all began on a random Wednesday morning. Max and I were doing our usual routine, waking up early, taking a walk around the neighborhood, and enjoying a peaceful morning. Max was healthy, happy, and as loyal as a dog could be. But that morning, something was off. Max refused to eat his breakfast, and instead of running around with his usual energy, he seemed sluggish and weak. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he had eaten something outside that upset his stomach. But as the day wore on, he got worse. He couldn't keep his head up. His eyes were glassy, and he seemed completely drained of energy. That was when I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. So I rushed him to the vet. The vet's diagnosis shook me to the core. "Your dog has been poisoned," he said bluntly, his face filled with concern. "We don't know exactly what it is yet, but we need to start treatment immediately. If you had waited any longer, we could have been dealing with much worse." Poisoned? I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Who would do something like that to an innocent dog? But the truth was, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was only one person who could have been behind it, Karen. She had always been a little too interested in my life, a little too vocal about what I was doing with Max. I had brushed it off, thinking she was just the overly involved neighbor. But now, looking back, it made perfect sense. She hated that Max was always around. She hated that people in the neighborhood liked him more than they liked her. But how could she have poisoned him? That was the question that haunted me as I sat in the vet's office, waiting for updates on Max's condition. I couldn't fathom it. What kind of person poisons an innocent animal? And more importantly, how did she do it? The vet did everything they could to help Max. It wasn't easy, and his recovery was slow. But after a few days, Max started showing signs of improvement. His energy came back in small bursts, and before I knew it, he was wagging his tail again. But the question still lingered in my mind. How did this happen? Who had done this to him? And why? A few days after Max was back on his feet, I decided to confront Karen. I wasn't going to sit around wondering. I had to get to the bottom of this, and if it meant going face to face with her, so be it. I knocked on Karen's door, my heart pounding in my chest. When she opened it, she smiled, but there was something off about it. A little too forced, a little too rehearsed. "Can I help you?" she asked, standing in the doorway, clearly not expecting me. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice steady, but filled with an edge I couldn't quite hide. "My dog, Max. He was poisoned, and I think you know something about it." Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Poisoned? Oh my God, that's awful," she said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "But why do you think I know anything about that?" I didn't trust her for a second. "You've been very interested in Max lately," I said, crossing my arms. "You always have something to say about him. It wouldn't surprise me if you went to extreme measures to get rid of him." Her face shifted ever so slightly. She could tell I wasn't buying her act. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "What are you implying?" she asked, her voice turning colder. "Are you accusing me of poisoning your dog?" I didn't have concrete proof. Not yet, but I could feel it in my gut. She was involved somehow, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. "I'm not accusing you," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm just trying to figure out how this happened. And you're the only one I can think of who would do something like this." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Then, with a forced sigh, she stepped aside and let me in. "Fine, let's talk." I walked into her house, my eyes scanning the room for anything suspicious. Karen had always struck me as the type who liked to control everything in her environment. But what was she really hiding? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't leaving until I found out. As we sat down, Karen continued her fake act of concern, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of her next move. She had to be, because the truth was, I was on the verge of exposing her. I'm going to be honest with you, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I'm not leaving here until I get some answers. So, why don't you start by telling me where you were the day Max got sick? Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. I don't know, she said, clearly stalling. I don't remember what I was doing that day. I could feel my frustration building, but I kept it in check. I had to play this right. You're sure you don't remember? I pressed. You don't remember seeing anything unusual? Or maybe something in your yard? Her face went pale. I saw it then. The shift in her eyes, the tiny twitch in her expression. She was lying. She knew exactly what happened. That's when I decided to take the conversation in a different direction. I leaned in closer, my voice steady but laced with enough authority to make her squirm. You know, Karen, I said, the vet confirmed that the poison was a very specific type of toxin, not something you'd find lying around by accident. It had to have been intentionally placed, and the more I think about it, the more I realize it could have only come from someone who knew exactly how to use it. Her lips parted slightly, and for a brief moment, I thought she might confess. But she recovered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just trying to help you, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I didn't buy it for a second. Karen was a manipulator, and I had seen enough of her antics to know she was good at spinning stories. But this time, I wasn't falling for her act. I stood up and began pacing the room, thinking through my next steps. What do you think will happen when I go to the authorities with this information? I asked, my tone casual but with a sharp edge. You know they'll investigate the source of the poison, and once they trace it back to you, well, you won't be able to talk your way out of it. Karen's face paled. She clearly hadn't expected me to be so direct, so confident. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her perfect, controlled facade. She was starting to panic. I don't have time for this, she said, rising to her feet, her hand shaking slightly. You're making a huge mistake. I have nothing to do with this. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. You've been poisoning Max, I said, locking eyes with her. But what you don't realize is that you've made a critical mistake. I've been collecting evidence, your own poison, your own lies. She froze, her eyes widening, and I knew I had her. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice faltering for the first time. I found something you left behind, Karen, I said. You made a huge mistake by leaving behind traces of the poison in your yard. A little bit of that poison ended up in Max's food. But what really gave you away was a package you had delivered last week, an order for the exact same type of toxin that was used to poison him. Her face drained of color, and I could see her mentally scrambling for an explanation, but it was too late. I had already turned her lies against her. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She knew I had caught her red-handed, and there was no easy way out now. I pulled out the small vial I had found in her yard, the one she had carelessly discarded. I had it tested, and it confirmed what I suspected. The poison was a rare, dangerous substance, and only a select few had access to it. I've already spoken with the lab, I said, holding the vial up for her to see. This is your poison, and soon enough, it'll all be traced back to you. Her eyes flicked to the vial, then back to me, and I could see the calculation in her expression. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, she said, her voice low and threatening. I know people who can make sure this all goes away. You can't just accuse me of poisoning your dog. You have no proof. I smiled, feeling a rush of satisfaction. You're wrong, I said. I have all the proof I need. And even better, I'm not the only one who's noticed your little habit of getting rid of problems. Max wasn't the first, and you know it. The authorities are already on their way. At that moment, I knew I had her cornered. She had underestimated me. thinking I was just another one of her easy targets. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I had evidence, and I wasn't going to let her get away with poisoning my dog. The truth was out, and Karen's days of getting away with her manipulative schemes were over. The sound of sirens in the distance reminded me that this was it, the final moment. Karen's time had run out. I had taken back control, using her own lies to expose her for the criminal she was. I didn't have to wait long for the police to arrive. They stormed through the front door, and within minutes, Karen was in cuffs, her world crashing down around her. The officers took her into custody, and I stood there, watching as she was led away, the smirk on her face replaced by a look of defeat. As I looked down at Max, who was now resting comfortably on the couch, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The fight was over. Karen had tried to poison my dog, but in the end, it was her own poison that led to her downfall. The police took Karen away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sure, she was behind bars now, but there were still unanswered questions. She had always been careful, manipulative in a way that made her actions seem almost invisible to the outside world. I couldn't let my guard down. As relieved as I felt that she had been caught, I knew there were still people out there who would do anything to protect their own interests, and Karen had powerful connections. The days following her arrest were a whirlwind. Max had fully recovered, thank God, but I still couldn't get rid of the nagging sense that I hadn't fully uncovered the extent of Karen's actions. She hadn't acted alone. I had seen enough of her to know that she wasn't just some random criminal. She was a part of something bigger, something much more sinister. I began to dive into Karen's past, speaking to neighbors and friends, searching for any piece of the puzzle that might give me a clue about who was really pulling the strings. One name kept coming up in conversation, Victor Collins. He was a wealthy businessman who had lived a few blocks over, but had kept to himself. No one knew much about him, other than that he was quiet and well-connected. As the investigation into Karen's activities continued, I learned more about Victor. He had a number of businesses, most of which were legitimate, but there were whispers that he was involved in shady dealings behind the scenes. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen's connection to him was not a coincidence. She had been working for him, or at least with him, for longer than anyone could have imagined. I needed answers, but I knew this wouldn't be easy. Victor was elusive, well-protected, and connected in ways I could never have anticipated. Still, I couldn't let that stop me. Karen's arrest had been a victory, but it felt hollow. She was just a small part of the web of lies and deception that had been woven around me, and I knew that to truly stop this, I had to go straight to the top. I started looking into Victor's businesses. There was something about his financial dealings that didn't add up. Every time I looked at one of his companies, it led to another, shell companies, accounts overseas, deals with people I didn't know. But as I sifted through the papers and records, one name kept appearing over and over again, Karen's. It seemed that every shady transaction was either approved by her or involved her in some way. I had to act fast. Karen's arrest had rattled Victor, and I knew he wouldn't stay quiet for long. As I reviewed the last bit of evidence I had, I got an idea. What if I could use Karen's involvement in these transactions to catch Victor? He wasn't just a businessman. He was part of an underground network that ran deep in the city, and I knew I had to dig deeper to expose him. I decided to visit one of Victor's properties, a large, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. There were no obvious signs of activity, but something about the place felt off. It was too quiet, too hidden, and I had a feeling that's where the real answers lay. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I couldn't back down now. I pulled up in front of the warehouse, the faded signage barely visible under the growing dusk. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years, the rusted metal doors barely hanging on their hinges. But my gut told me that this was exactly where I needed to be. Karen had been too involved in Victor's shady dealings, and now I was about to uncover the heart of it all. I parked my car a few blocks away and approached the warehouse on foot, staying low and moving quickly. The area was quiet, the sounds of the city far in the distance. I could feel my pulse quicken as I got closer. There was no sign of anyone around, but that didn't mean anything. If Victor had been using this warehouse as a base of operations, it was likely to be well guarded. I had to be careful. I checked the area for any security cameras or guards. The place seemed deserted, but the air around me felt tense, like something was waiting to happen. After scanning the building for a few minutes, I saw a small, cracked window on the side that led into what looked like an old storage room. It was my best shot. Quietly, I climbed onto a dumpster near the wall, crouching as I made my way toward the window. I peeked inside. The room was filled with boxes, crates, and stacks of papers. But there was something else, faint sounds of movement from the far corner of the room. Someone was inside. I hesitated. Should I go in now? Should I wait for backup? But the feeling of urgency pushed me forward. I had no idea how long I had before someone found out I was snooping around. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I grabbed the edge of the window and gently pulled myself inside, landing softly on the floor. The room was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb, casting shadows that made the place feel even more ominous. I moved quietly toward the back of the room, trying to make out what I was hearing. As I rounded the corner, I froze. Victor Collins was standing in front of a large, wooden crate, carefully inspecting its contents. He didn't see me. His back was turned, and he was too focused on what was inside. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and slowly crept closer. I had to act fast. I knew if I could just get a glimpse of whatever he was working on, it would be enough to expose him. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. The crate was filled with what looked like stolen goods, electronics, rare artifacts, and piles of unmarked bills. But it was more than that. There were several crates stacked around the room, each one holding large bags of something I couldn't immediately identify. Drugs? Weapons? The possibilities were endless. This was bigger than I could have imagined. I had to get out of there. I knew I couldn't face Victor alone. He was too dangerous. My plan was simple: get the evidence, get out, and call the authorities. I pulled out my phone, snapping a few quick pictures of the crates. But as soon as I did, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. My heart skipped a beat. It was too late. "Who's there?" Victor's voice cut through the silence like a knife. My blood ran cold as I froze, trying to make myself invisible in the shadows. I couldn't stay hidden forever. There was no choice now but to confront him. I stepped out from behind the crates, holding my phone up. "Victor Collins," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have everything I need to put you away for good." Victor's expression was unreadable as he turned toward me. For a moment, there was silence, just the two of us, locked in a standoff. Then, he let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You think you've got something on me, don't you?" he said, his voice laced with arrogance. "You think a few pictures are enough to bring me down? You don't know who you're dealing with." I took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. He was dangerous, far more dangerous than I had realized. But I wasn't backing down now. I had come too far, and I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. "You've been running a criminal empire," I said, keeping my voice firm, "and I've got all the evidence I need to shut it down." Victor took a step toward me, his gaze cold and calculating. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're up against. I've been in this business for years. People like you don't stand a chance." I didn't flinch. "You might be untouchable, Victor, but not anymore. You're going down, and this time, there's no escape." Victor's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed. I could see the anger building in him, and I knew I had to act fast. If I didn't, things were about to get a lot more dangerous. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, taking one last step back toward the door. "I've already called the police. Your empire ends here." I spun around, bolting for the exit. I heard Victor's footsteps behind me, but I was faster. I kicked open the door, racing out into the alley. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing with everything I had just uncovered. But I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I reached my car, jumping into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. I fumbled for my phone, dialing Detective Carter's number as I sped off. "Carter," I said, my voice breathless. "I've got everything. It's worse than we thought. Victor's running a full-scale operation. Drugs, weapons, stolen goods, it's all there. You need to act fast." "Stay calm." Carter's voice came through, steady and reassuring. "We're on our way. Just stay where you are." I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. The pieces were falling into place, and I knew this was the beginning of the end for Victor Collins and his criminal network. But I also knew that the danger wasn't over yet. Collins had too much power, too many connections, and I wasn't naive enough to think he would go down without a fight. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. I had taken control, exposed the truth, and now it was time for justice to be served. I parked my car a few blocks away from the warehouse, waiting for backup to arrive. My heart was still racing, adrenaline keeping me on edge. I knew this wasn't over. Victor would be scrambling now, trying to cover his tracks, erase any evidence I had just exposed. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had come too far to back out now. The truth was in my hands, and I wasn't about to let him slip through my fingers. As I sat there, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed in such a short time. Just a few weeks ago, my life had been simple, peaceful. Then Karen tried to poison Max, and everything spiraled from there. Now I was in the middle of uncovering a criminal network, with Victor Collins at the center of it all. The web was tangled and deep, and I knew there were still so many pieces to uncover. But I had to stay focused. There was no room for distractions. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Detective Carter. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. "We've got your back, but we need to move quickly." "I'm at the warehouse. I've got the evidence, but I need you to get here fast. I'm not sure how much time we have before Victor and his people start covering their tracks." I replied. "Hang tight. We're 5 minutes away," Carter assured me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The last thing I wanted was to go in without backup, but it was clear that time was running out. The longer I waited, the more time Victor had to hide whatever he was planning next. As I sat there, I scanned the area once more, looking for any signs of activity. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel like it was happening in slow motion. Then, just as I was about to call Carter again, I saw a shadow moving in the alley across from the warehouse. My heart skipped a beat. Was it Victor? Or one of his men? I grabbed my phone and texted Carter, updating him on the situation. I couldn't afford to take any chances. The last thing I needed was to be caught off guard. The shadow grew larger, and then a figure emerged, one I didn't recognize. A man in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He was walking quickly, his steps purposeful, as if he knew exactly where he was going. I watched him closely, trying to figure out his next move. But then, just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared behind the warehouse. I didn't waste any time. I pulled my car into a nearby alley, out of sight, and waited. If the man was working for Victor, I knew he would lead me straight to him. My stomach was tight with anticipation. This could be the break I was waiting for. I didn't have to wait long. Minutes later, I saw the man emerge from the back of the warehouse, walking toward a black SUV that had been parked nearby. He got in without looking back, and the vehicle sped off down the street. Without hesitation, I followed. The black SUV sped through the streets, weaving in and out of traffic, but I wasn't going to lose him. I kept a steady distance behind, careful not to draw attention to myself, but also unable to shake the feeling that this was the most critical moment of the entire investigation. Whoever this man was, he was connected to Victor, and that meant I was getting closer to the truth. As we drove further out of the city, the surroundings grew less familiar. The bright lights of downtown faded, replaced by industrial buildings and empty lots. I knew this area, near the edge of town, where few people ventured at night. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find legitimate businesses, and I had a sinking feeling that I was about to discover something far more sinister than I had anticipated. I kept my distance, carefully maneuvering my car through the darkened streets, making sure not to alert the SUV to my presence. The closer I got to my destination, the more I realized just how much danger I was in. Victor wasn't just running an illegal operation. He was running it in plain sight, hiding in places no one would think to look. Eventually, the SUV turned onto a narrow road that led to a large, gated property. It was well secured, with high fences and floodlights illuminating the perimeter. The gate swung open slowly, and the SUV disappeared inside, followed by a second vehicle. I pulled over to the side of the road, parking in the shadows of a nearby building, and waited. I needed to be smart about this. If I just walked in, I could be caught before I even got close to figuring out what was happening inside. Instead, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to Carter. Found the location. Need backup. I didn't have much time, but I knew that getting more eyes on this was crucial. As I waited for his reply, I scanned the compound. There was a faint light in one of the windows, and I could make out the vague shape of the buildings inside. Whatever was going on in there, it was too quiet, too secretive. It didn't look like a legitimate operation, at least not by the usual standards. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed with a response from Carter. We're close. Stay put. I exhaled in relief. Backup was on the way. But even as I felt the weight of the situation lift, I knew that time was running out. I couldn't afford to wait too long. Victor was smart, and he wouldn't be caught unaware for much longer. I slipped out of the car, taking slow, measured steps toward the compound. The darkness worked in my favor, and I moved as quietly as possible, keeping to the shadows. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I focused on one thing, getting to the heart of this operation. I reached the perimeter fence and crouched low. There was a weak spot near the corner, where the fence had been slightly damaged. I crawled through, feeling the sharp metal edges scrape against my skin as I made my way inside. The compound was eerily silent as I crept toward the buildings. Every step I took felt heavier, but I couldn't stop now. I had to know what was hidden here, what Victor and his men were doing behind these walls. The place was too guarded, too secretive, for it to be anything ordinary. I approached the nearest building, moving carefully. The door was locked, but I knew there had to be a way in. I glanced around and spotted a small window at the back. I approached it cautiously, using the metal pipe nearby to pry it open. It creaked loudly, but I quickly slipped inside, making sure to keep as quiet as possible. The inside of the building was dark and smelled musty. It was a storage area, filled with crates and boxes. I slowly crept deeper into the room, moving between the shadows. Then I froze. A voice. Low, deep. It came from the other side of the room. I held my breath, listening closely. The voice was muffled, but I could make out a few words. More shipments coming in tomorrow. Make sure the guards are ready. The boss doesn't want any mistakes. The tension in my chest thickened. This wasn't just a warehouse storing stolen goods. This was a hub of operations, organized, planned, and controlled by someone with power. My instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to slip away before I was discovered, but I couldn't. I needed more than just a few cryptic words. I needed evidence. I crept closer, moving between the crates, careful to avoid the light filtering through the small windows. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I could hear the voices more clearly now, two men, discussing what sounded like an upcoming deal. My fingers tightened around the edge of a nearby crate as I peered around the corner, trying to see who they were. It wasn't long before I saw them. Two men, both dressed in black, standing near a stack of crates. They were talking in low tones, too absorbed in their conversation to notice the small movements of someone else in the room. I stayed as still as possible, listening closely, trying to gather anything I could to help bring this down. Make sure you get the next shipment of the chemicals in tonight, one of the men said. The boss wants everything ready for the drop-off tomorrow. If we're late, we're out of business. He's not playing anymore. Got it, the other man replied. What about the girl? The one who's been asking too many questions? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The girl. It was like a punch to the gut. They were talking about me. The first man's voice grew darker. Take care of her. We don't need loose ends, especially not with the cops sniffing around. My blood ran cold. They knew about me. I wasn't just getting close to the truth. I had become a target. I had to get out of there. Now, I quietly backed away, my mind racing. I was no longer just an investigator. I was a marked person, someone they would eliminate if I got too close to exposing them. The sound of my breath seemed deafening in the silence of the warehouse, but I forced myself to move faster. I turned to leave, but stopped short. A noise behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was caught. There was no way out. I slowly turned, my body rigid with fear, only to see one of the men from the conversation standing a few feet away, staring right at me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then, without a word, he stepped forward. My body reacted before my brain could fully catch up. I bolted, racing for the window I had slipped through earlier. The man shouted after me, but I didn't stop. I knew I had only one chance to escape, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. I hurled myself through the window, scraping my arms and legs on the way out, but I didn't care. I hit the ground hard, rolling to cushion the fall, and then I was up again, running full speed. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, and I could hear someone yelling, but I wasn't looking back. I had to get out of there. My heart was pounding in my chest as I sprinted down the alley, the sound of my pursuers' footsteps growing louder. I could hear the distant roar of traffic, the safety of the city just a few blocks away. But the warehouse was still in my mind, the weight of what I had just heard hanging over me. I had to get the police involved. I had to get backup, and I needed to do it fast. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and quickly started the engine. I had to get to the police station, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed Carter. He had to know everything, what I had uncovered, what had just happened. He was the only person I could trust now. As I sped through the city streets, I could feel the adrenaline leaving my body, but I wasn't safe yet. The danger was still there, lurking just beyond the horizon, and it was closing in fast. I pushed my car to its limits, weaving through traffic, with one thought racing through my mind: get to Carter. The warehouse had been more than just a hiding place for stolen goods. What I had stumbled upon was a full-blown criminal operation: drugs, weapons, stolen artifacts. And it wasn't just some petty criminal ring. Victor Collins was the mastermind behind it all, and now I had become a target. I turned the corner toward the police station, relief washing over me at the thought of getting Carter involved. At least with his help, we could expose the network for what it truly was. But even as I pulled into the parking lot, something didn't feel right. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I parked the car and stepped out cautiously, scanning the area. There were a few people walking around, but none of them seemed to be paying attention to me. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of unease gnawing at me. I had learned the hard way that when you start digging into something this deep, you become the target, not the hero. I hurried toward the entrance of the station, my mind racing with everything I had just seen. The police had to be brought in immediately, but as I approached the door, I froze. A black SUV was parked right outside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the driver's side window roll down, and the same man I had seen at the warehouse earlier leaned out. My stomach dropped. They found me. I quickly turned on my heel and walked briskly toward the alley behind the station. I couldn't let them catch me here, not with everything at stake. I just made it inside the station, and I couldn't afford to blow it now. I darted into the alley, my breath coming in short gasps as I tried to control the rising panic. I could hear the SUV's engine starting in the distance, and that was when it hit me. This wasn't just a threat anymore. This was a full-scale pursuit. I needed to move. I couldn't stay here. I pulled out my phone and dialed Carter's number, heart pounding as I waited for him to answer. "Carter, they're here. They're following me. You need to get the team out here now. I'm not safe." There was a pause. Then his voice came through, urgent and focused. "Get to a safe location. I'm on my way, but stay sharp. They'll be watching." I didn't waste time responding. I ended the call and hurried down the alley, looking for a place to hide, somewhere to regroup. I wasn't sure how long I had before they closed in, but every instinct told me to keep moving. I made my way to a small diner on the corner, slipping inside just as the black SUV drove past. I could barely breathe as I slid into a booth at the back, out of sight from the windows. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to focus. I couldn't let fear take over. I needed to stay calm, keep a level head, and figure out what to do next. The minutes felt like hours, the din of the diner's chatter drowning out the thoughts spinning in my head. I glanced out the window cautiously, spotting the SUV parked down the street. They were waiting. It was clear now. They knew I was onto them, and I had no doubt that they would stop at nothing to keep me from exposing the truth. I sat there, watching, waiting, until I finally saw Carter's car pull into the parking lot. My pulse quickened at the sight. The cavalry had arrived. He stepped out of his car, his expression tense as he scanned the area. I quickly stood up and made my way toward him, not wanting to risk being seen in the diner any longer. "They're outside," I said as Carter walked toward me. "I think they figured out what I found." "Let's get inside. We'll talk there," he said, his voice low and urgent. We entered the station, and Carter immediately called for backup. "I need a team here now," he barked, speaking to someone on the other end of the phone. "We've got a situation. Hold the perimeter." I took a seat, trying to steady myself. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and my mind was racing with the information I had uncovered. We were at a tipping point now. Victor, Karen, and whoever else was involved couldn't be allowed to slip through the cracks. But Carter's calm demeanor helped me refocus. "Here's what we're going to do," Carter said, sitting across from me. "You've already gathered the evidence, but we need to hit them hard and fast. The more we wait, the more time they have to clean up their mess." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. "What do you need from me?" "We'll need you to testify," Carter replied, his voice steady. "We've got enough to bring Victor in, but your testimony could be the final piece. Once we've got him, we can bring down the entire network." But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was too easy. Victor had already shown that he was willing to go to great lengths to protect himself. If he knew I was involved, there was no telling what lengths he would go to shut me down. I had to act fast. We both did. I sat there, my mind racing as I processed everything Carter had just told me. Testifying against Victor and his entire network would be a huge step forward, but the risks were enormous. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just playing a role in taking down a few bad actors. I was getting involved in something much bigger than myself, something dangerous and far-reaching. And I couldn't help but feel like we were all standing at the edge of a cliff. Carter's phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. He looked down at the screen, his eyes narrowing before he quickly put it down. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Victor knows we're coming. Someone tipped him off." My stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "Because one of our officers just spotted a few of his men heading out of the warehouse. They're getting ready to move." Carter's expression turned grim. "We don't have much time. We need to move fast, or we risk losing everything." I stood up, ready to spring into action. "What's the plan?" "We'll need to set up a perimeter around the warehouse," Carter said. "Get a team in place, and make sure we lock down every escape route. We can't let Victor slip away again." I nodded. "I'll help in any way I can. But we need to be careful. If they know we're coming, they'll have their own backup waiting." Carter met my gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "We've got this. You've already given us the lead. Now it's time to finish this." We quickly put the plan into motion. Carter contacted the other officers, and within minutes, we were all heading out to the warehouse, ready to strike. I felt the weight of what was about to happen settling in. This wasn't just about exposing Victor or taking down Karen. It was about dismantling a dangerous criminal network that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. As we approached the warehouse, the scene felt eerily familiar. The lights were off, and the air felt thick with tension. But I knew I couldn't let that stop me. I had come too far to back down now. We moved swiftly and silently, like ghosts in the night, creeping toward the entrance of the warehouse. The door creaked as we pushed it open, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Inside, everything seemed still, too still. I glanced at Carter, who nodded, signaling for us to move further into the building. We were getting closer to the heart of the operation. We moved cautiously through the rows of crates, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick walls. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I kept my focus on every detail around me, knowing that one mistake could be fatal. Then, suddenly, a door opened in front of us. A figure stepped out, and for a brief moment, I thought we had been spotted. But it wasn't Victor. It was one of his men, someone I had seen at the warehouse before. He froze when he saw us, his eyes widening in recognition. Before he could react, Carter stepped forward, his gun raised. "Don't move," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest." The man hesitated for a moment, but then, realizing he was cornered, he slowly raised his hands in surrender. Carter handcuffed him and signaled to the others to move in. We had him, but we still weren't done. I knew that Victor was still somewhere in the building, and I wasn't going to let him slip away. We had to find him and put an end to this, once and for all. We moved deeper into the warehouse, carefully checking each room. The silence was oppressive, but it was clear that we were getting closer. The air was thick with anticipation. I could almost feel the weight of the moment. This was it. We were about to bring down one of the most dangerous criminals I had ever encountered. Finally, we reached the last room in the back of the warehouse. The door was locked, but it didn't take much to break it down. Inside, we found Victor, pacing nervously, his eyes darting between us. "You're too late," he sneered. "You think this is going to end with me? You have no idea what you're up against." But I wasn't intimidated. I had heard that line too many times. "You're done, Victor," I said, my voice steady. "You're not going anywhere." Victor's face twisted with rage as the officers moved in to cuff him. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning. You can't stop what's coming." As he was let out of the warehouse, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. We had done it. We had taken down the operation, exposed the truth, and put an end to Victor's reign of terror. But even as he was driven away in the back of a police car, I knew that this was far from over. There were still more people out there, more criminals who had been a part of this network. I walked out of the warehouse, my heart still racing, and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew that this was just the beginning. There was always more to uncover, always another battle to fight, and I was ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this wild ride and want to hear more about the battles I faced, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned.